Hello, and welcome to Swarthmore's 5th Annual Senior Showcase. I'm Alba Newman-Holmes. I'm a faculty member here at the college, and I also direct the Writing Associates and Speaking Associates program. The Senior Showcase is a collaboration between the Center for Innovation and Leadership and the Speaking Associates. Seniors on our campus often have opportunities to share their work and be celebrated within their departments, but the showcase offers us a rare opportunity to go beyond disciplinary boundaries and to learn about the rich intellectual and creative endeavors of our seniors.
Hi everyone, my name is Katie Clark. I am the Assistant Dean for Integrated Learning and Leadership and the Director of the Center for Innovation and Leadership at Swarthmore. And I really appreciate our Senior Showcase program because it really focuses on an essential leadership capacity, which is communication, right? Taking a huge amount of information and thinking about how to synthesize and share that with other people. And this is a great opportunity for seniors to show off a little bit and to tell us more about the work they've been doing for a significant amount of their Swarthmore experience. I also just want to say we've been really impressed with the persistence and resilience of this senior class and are excited to be able to deliver this today.
Each of the videos that you'll see today is the culmination of a process that began with a nomination from a faculty member or peer. Each of the seniors participated in a workshop. They met individually with speaking associates to review how they would distill that complex project into just 3 minutes and just one slide.
We want to say a few thank yous before we begin. First off, to the speaking associates for taking the time to be excellent coaches and partners with the seniors and helping them define questions, reimagine some ways to explain their concepts and to really walk with the seniors as they work on these presentations. A special thanks to the Writing Center, to Alba and Joanne, to the Center for Innovation and Leadership, to Carl and Sam. A big thank you to Communications for making this virtual adventure happen. And most importantly, to the seniors. We so appreciate you wanting to do this and taking the energy and time to give these presentations. Thank you to your faculty, friends, family who have helped you. And we're just really excited to be able to kick off Senior Showcase today.
Hello, my name is John, and I'm a theater major. But if anyone were to ask me what I studied for my 4 years at Swarthmore, I would say that I studied how to tell a story. For me, stories are immensely important because through stories, I can at least attempt to make sense of things that really make no sense. So for this senior showcase, I want to share a story. The title of this piece is Nails and Teeth. When I was 11, a new kid came to my class. He looked like any one of us and he talked like any one of us. But his last name wasn't Park or Lee or Kim, it was Hiro because his dad was Japanese. No one in the school liked him. Boys would sometimes strip his pants and throw it out the window, so he would have to walk outside in his underwear to go and get it. All the girls screamed and took photos of him in his underwear, sending the pictures to their friends so everyone knew at school that he walked around only in his underwear. One time I was in the bathroom and he came running in. I saw him see me and he saw me see him. He hid inside a bathroom stall and a little later boys burst into the bathroom. The biggest grabbed me by the collar and asked if I've seen him. I thought, what would happen to him if I told him? And I thought, what would happen to me if I didn't tell him? And I pointed to where he was. He smiled and let me go. I fell on the ground and quietly crawled away while I heard Hiro getting pulled out of the stall. But right before I left the bathroom, I looked behind and saw the boys all lined up, firing piss at Hiro. It was hard to watch, but it was also hard not to watch. In 1910, the Japanese Empire colonized the Korean peninsula. That's why a lot of Koreans don't like the Japanese. Many Koreans fought for independence, but it was a tough fight. My grandfather often told me about his father and how he was imprisoned for protesting. He was tortured for weeks. They pulled his nails out and they pulled his teeth out. But my grandfather told me that his father didn't give in and was set free after a month. But I think the worst conduct of the Japanese Empire was making us turn against each other. The empire gave rice to Koreans who would tell what others Koreans said and did. Everyone was in need of rice, and lots of people died from saying what they shouldn't have said in front of those that really needed the rice. In 1945, Korea finally gained independence. The government was restored and justice was to be served. It was time to find the traitors. But in 1950, the Korean War occurred, and there was no time for finding who did what. Sometimes I try to imagine who I would have been. How many nails and teeth do I need to live? How many nails and teeth could I give for a purpose? But then, how much harm can saying some names do? How much harm can saying anything really do? I need some names and I need the rice. I have a son and I know some names. I know some names and I need the rice. My son is hungry. I know some names. I want my nails and teeth. Last year, my grandfather passed. His final few days were rough. He couldn't recognize anyone and he kept talking to someone that wasn't there about something no one understood. He kept saying, "Where did you get the rice? Where did you get the rice? Where did you get the rice?" Thank you.
Hi, my name is Barton. I use they, them pronouns, and today we'll be presenting on my thesis work entitled Major Problems, Choice of Major in Transgender College Students. Think for a moment about what brought you to where you are. If you're a student, what made you choose your path through college? If you're not a student, what made you choose your career? These are typically well-studied questions, especially within the field of higher education. However, this is not true of all groups. In particular, transgender identities are not well studied when it comes to their choice of major. Thus, this year, my thesis work focused on answering a few questions related to this. Do transgender students show a difference in the majors they choose? And if so, what pushes them towards or pulls them away from different majors? I created a survey distributed to LGBTQ collegians and performed semi-structured interviews with transgender collegians to look for answers to these questions. The results I found surprised me. You see, one of the first findings I found was that transgender identity was incredibly salient. In other words, it's very important and relevant to everyday interactions. Yet, despite this, it seemed that transgender identity made no difference to choice of major. If it's so important, then why would that be? Well, it turns out that in order to make a choice, there needs to be some difference in your options. As far as using identity to pick a major goes, there would need to be different levels of support in different majors, which you would expect to see. But there wasn't. There was no difference. Support for transgender students was bad everywhere, so there wasn't enough of a difference in support that transgender identity could matter in these decisions. What I did find, however, was that despite this, transgender students showed incredible practices of resilience in order to persevere despite these conditions. One of the most major strategies that I found was that of kinship networks, basically groups of people that provide support to a student. With the support of their friends and peers, transgender students managed to find ways of enduring the hardships with which they were faced and found success in their chosen fields despite all of the opposition against them. If I leave you with one thing from this presentation, though, I would want it to be this. It's sad enough to hear that it's bad everywhere for transgender students. So do something. If you're a student, reach out to support your transgender peers however you can. If you're in a position of greater power, see what you can do from that position to help make spaces where transgender students are welcome and where they might start to see that difference between these spaces that they find themselves in. In short, do something. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dylan Clairmont, and I am interested in the way political communities communicate online. To get a little more specific, Twitter is the site of my research, which is slightly by chance, as I use Twitter every day. And while I know that it has its definite flaws, there are many positives of Twitter as a site for political use that I think the general populace might not know if they are not a regular user. Twitter is also a worthwhile site for political research as it has had an increasingly prominent role in our politics, with conversations of Russian bots, Trump's Twitter account, and the rise of the online alt-right being all over the news. I was curious to see how communities react to breaking news stories. What does the process look like when a political community receives a piece of news and interprets it? I knew I needed a specific community to inquire, and I ultimately landed upon Rose Twitter, a community that is made up of members who include a rose emoji in either their Twitter bio or handle to politically signal socialist or leftist beliefs. Within the US, they could be approximated as Bernie Bros, but it's a little more complicated than that. By studying Rose Twitter, I could look at how a somewhat fringe political group was intaking breaking news events and how this discourse was shaping public opinion and messaging. So I found a subset of Rose Twitter members, created a corpus of their tweets, and analyzed them. In order to analyze how information was being transferred, I used the framework of intertextuality. Intertextuality simply refers to the fact that all texts relate to past texts, in this case, tweets. Intertextuality has been analyzed on Twitter mainly through the framing of the hashtag, due to the fact that the hashtag is a very literal interpretation of intertextuality as it connects a tweet to an existing discourse, which is all other tweets with the same hashtag. However, I wanted to go beyond the hashtag and find other uses of intertextuality by Rose Twitter members that were more covert, those which relied upon past tweets to create meaning and further political ideology. Ultimately, I found that Rose Twitter is a site of exploration and expression for these members, allowing them to interpret news with others who share similar political beliefs. The title of my linguistics thesis is Intertextuality Beyond the Hashtag, How Members of Rose Twitter Respond to Breaking News. That probably wouldn't have meant anything to you if I would have said that at the beginning of the presentation. My hope is that it means something at the end. Thank you.
My name is Leah D'Alessandro. I use she, her pronouns, and today I will be presenting my senior thesis dance project entitled Collectivity. This piece showcases the strength of diversity within community and how differences in collaboration lead to the production of a greater whole. 3 females are highlighted on stage with lighting, costuming, and all, exploring the abyss of the stage and the theater. The essence of live performance is captured to showcase the dancer's communal environment, in addition to the journey of returning to the stage after a year of being away. This piece was inspired by my own journey within dance culture. I began dancing at the age of 2.5 years old. From very early on, I was stereotyped for being a short, Asian, athletically built female that didn't belong in the ballet world. When I arrived at Swarthmore's dance department, it was the first time I was fully supported for my differences, in contrast to the ideal body and ethnic images of dance culture. This image is mainly that of white, lean, taller females due to the hierarchical placement of ballet above other dance styles. Unfortunately, dance culture today continues to perpetuate this culture. However, efforts are being made to incorporate inclusivity in concert dance. Swarthmore was the first time I felt supported in defying these dance cultural stereotypes, in addition to enabling me to feel proud and empowered for my strong and fiery movement style. This realization further developed during the past year of being away from the dance community. When the time to create my senior project came about, I wanted to combine everything that I've learned during my time here into one piece. The message that I honed in upon was the importance of diversity in the collective. The movement is inspired by my own natural movement quality, in addition to several projects that I've been a part of at Swarthmore. These include previous senior dance projects, residencies, and even previous work of my own. Additionally, I took inspiration from my dancers and collaborated with them to develop movement repertoire. I wanted their identities to be a central part of the creation of this work. We explored our connection to one another and to dance to identify our communal environment of dance and how we exist within that whole. The filming, setting, and costuming have been designed to highlight their individuality within a collective. Several shots were conducted from various angles in addition to moving shots in order to capture the feeling of momentum and mobility in dance. Presented before you are 3 individuals coming together to create one whole. These females exemplify power and strength. It cannot be ignored that they each are individually beautiful in movement, but that their collaboration enables the creation of a greater beauty than that of solitude. Thank you for listening, and I hope you see Collectivity presented on May 7th and May 8th.
My name is Cameron Johnson, and I'm a history student. Can medieval history be political propaganda? In 711 AD, Tariq ibn Ziyad, a commander from the Umayyad Caliphate, led an army into Iberia and established Umayyad control in southern Spain. For over 7 centuries, this part of the peninsula would be ruled by various Muslim states. The Spanish kingdoms that remained in northern Spain slowly expanded southwards in a process known as the Reconquista, culminating in 1492 with the conquest of Granada and the expulsion of the Jews and the Moors. In the 1930s, Spain dissolved its monarchy and established a republic. Many, especially in the military, disliked the republic and formed a nationalist coalition. These forces instigated the Spanish Civil War and under General Francisco Franco took control of the country. Muslim, Arab, North African, and Jewish presence in Spain all have imprints on Spanish culture that are easily apparent today. However, Franco's image for Spain was homogeneous in language, culture, and religion. How, then, did nationalist educational texts present this multi-ethnic and multi-religious period of Spanish history? First, within the nationalists, there were 2 major factions: fascists, in line with Mussolini and the Nazi Party, and traditionalist Carlists, who wished for a theocratic monarchy. These 2 groups diverged in how they presented Spanish history. Fascist authors centered the nation and a national character as something that had always existed and needed to be raised above all else. The Muslim rule in Spain was a historical aberration, a foreign presence in a land that belonged to a Spanish nation. To the fascists, the Reconquista was important because it reasserted the nation and national identity and brought Spain into an era where it was one of the major world powers. Catholic religion was important, but only in that it was part of what formed Spanish identity. The nation was the ultimate end, and all aspects of history and religion only mattered as part of the national identity. Traditionalist authors centered this history in a grander narrative of East versus West that, in the 20th century, had turned into a war against communism. Muslim rule and the Reconquista were a part of this global struggle to protect the West and, perhaps more importantly, the Catholic Church. The traditionalists saw a divine hierarchy ordained by God. Spain's role was to serve this hierarchy on a global scale and preserve these hierarchies of aristocracy, of monarchy, of gender within the nation. Despite these differences, it is important to remember that both factions were serving the same government and had very similar goals for the country, which involved brutal repression of ethnic and linguistic minorities, maintaining Spain's last colonial holds, and political repression. Both factions repeatedly described the Civil War as a second Reconquista and directly compared figures like Franco to medieval military leaders. The history classroom was, for nationalist authors, a propagandistic space where students would learn a version of history that would lead them to see the brutal tactics of the nationalist government as something both necessary and good for the nation. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Momoka Keicho and I study educational studies and linguistics. So I was talking to a Swarthmore first year student who was taking a math class over Zoom, and they told me, I wish I knew more of the mathematical jargon to be able to fully articulate what I'm doing in the problem. Since the other people in my breakout room also don't know the proper terms what we're doing in the class, it's okay that I use simple terms. Mathematical jargon has historically been framed as an example of an ideology called academic language. At elite higher education institutions like SWAT, it is often expected that students speak using this academic language in class. But arguably, academic language isn't a set of objective and distinct language practices, but instead an ideology that is most closely tied to the language of the elite white male speakers who have historically dominated academia. For my thesis, I interviewed a bunch of Swarthmore students about their language practices in class and how they interact with this ideology. Here's what I found. Linguistically diverse students expressed feeling like their natural language practices weren't being recognized or appreciated by the institution in the classroom. The school seems to recognize only this elite white male academic speak, instead of students' diverse and differing dialects, languages, accents, vocabularies, and more. Thus, students expressed needing to perform a variety of additional linguistic efforts to effectively participate and negotiate meaning of the content material of their classes. I identified 4 main types of extra sociolinguistic labor that students felt they needed to perform to succeed in college. One of these efforts was finding spaces outside of the main classroom where institutional expectations of academic language were abandoned. In the context of online learning during the pandemic, virtual spaces like the Zoom chat, breakout rooms, and class group chats became safe spaces where students could engage authentically with the content material using their natural language practices. In person, these spaces look more like side conversations during class, group work, and meeting with friends outside of class. Just like the student said in the quote, students said they felt more comfortable just speaking what's on their mind to formulate ideas without worrying about any language expectations, removing a barrier to participation and allowing them to focus on the content material instead. So, institutional expectations for academic language in the main classroom are making students more hesitant to participate and engage authentically with the content material. The racialized, gendered, and class-based norms of academic language are making classrooms inaccessible for students with diverse linguistic backgrounds. Instead of relying on students to take additional steps to overcome these linguistic expectations on their own, institutions like Swarthmore should work to recognize and value the linguistic practices that its diverse students bring to the classroom with them, breaking down barriers to participation and building a more inclusive learning environment for all students. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Peem, and today I'm going to introduce you to my senior showcase project, which is to estimate the duration of extinction of dinosaurs using the fossil record. So one problem that paleontologists care deeply about is that does the extinction happen suddenly or does it happen gradually? A sudden extinction may look like what you see on the left, whereby due to some unexpected events, such as a giant meteorite that came down and obliterated every single species. A gradual extinction may look like what you see on the right, whereby due to some natural processes, species after species gradually became extinct, such as due to, say, global warming. To estimate this duration of extinction, paleontologists usually rely on fossil records, but we cannot rely on fossil records directly because of the incompleteness of the dataset. So, for instance, some fossils might be destroyed before before they have ever been unearthed. Other species that died might not be fossilized, and even if they were fossilized, we might not have found them. So, the incompleteness of the dataset compels the need for statistics. What I did in this project with Professor Steve Wang and another colleague is to parameterize the extinction process for each species with two parameters, theta and lambda. Theta denotes the true extinction time, whereas lambda denotes how quickly the extinction happens. We titled it the recovery potential. In reality, what we care about is theta, the true extinction time. So what I did in this project is twofold. First is we developed a statistical algorithm that calculates how likely it is for us to see a current data set under the each assumed data, which is the each assumed extinction time. And then afterwards, we simulate the data based on based on the parameters that we estimate on the true data set. In our simulation, we know the true parameter values. So if our algorithm performs well on a data set that we simulate, and our simulation matches the reality, then whatever algorithm that we use should match well with the true data set. So once we have calculated the confidence interval for each species, we can subtract the max and the mean given by the statistical algorithm to calculate the duration of extinction.
Hi everyone, I'm Lucas Pietrantonio, and today I'll be telling you about my engineering comprehensive design project. Over the last 4 months, I have designed and built this. Yep, it's a small pile of wires that make a bike light. This product is not the most complicated design in the world, but the work that I put in to get to this point was meaningful and listened to the voices of users. Now, I've been biking since I was a kid and recently began to notice the safety concerns present while riding. And many of these stem from not being seen by drivers. So I set out to design a bike light. I did some background research and a lot of Googling, but quickly realized I needed to center users' voices in this design to gain better insight into the problem. So I surveyed 31 individuals and interviewed 14 of them. I asked them about what was and wasn't working for them currently, what ideas they had for improvements, and I tried to understand their stories. After this, I was able to firm up some details about my design, such as ideal battery life and mounting system. But I was left with a lot more questions about how much light is actually necessary given different conditions. So I turned to Swarthmore professors to provide more understanding. Lynn Moulter, an optics professor in the engineering department, took the time to explain to me why the answer to my question was actually much more complex than I initially thought. But she helped me design a practical experiment to figure out how much light is necessary to be seen during the day, night, and at dusk and dawn. I also talked with Frank Durgan in the psychology department to get a better grasp of human perception. He explained that humans are notoriously bad at judging objects' size, distance, and speed, especially at night. We talked about creative ideas to help drivers understand their distance from a biker by trying to demonstrate a rider's size or providing a reference on the ground that may be more perceivable by drivers. These two professors demonstrated that the question of building a bike light is more multidisciplinary than I initially thought. And while the experiment created with Professor Moulter is ongoing, once I have collected the information, it will inform the design, thus bringing it to a culmination. If the user desires, the system will adjust its light output to appropriate levels based on the ambient light conditions of their environment, which brings us full circle to that small jumble of wires on the screen. Some of you might be wondering, why is user-based design important for something as small as a bike light? And it's because the consequences of not including these voices in design can be disastrous. Riders end up using lights that don't fit their needs, underperform, and oftentimes are far too expensive. This causes bicyclists to get hit by vehicles. The leading cause of bike accidents is getting hit from behind. And so we should listen to those that have had these accidents, hear from those that have felt nervous riding in a bike lane on a city street, and take the steps to all learn from their experiences and work to integrate the technical knowledge around us into solutions. We have proved user-centered design works. Now let's start using it. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Yifan. For my honors anthropology senior project, Two Promising Lands, I studied GRE test prep regime for upper middle class, academically achieving Chinese international students and how they maintain their educational success in US prestigious universities. In 2020, I finished my own GRE preparation, took the exam, and became a GRE instructor myself. I helped many Chinese international students, just like me, prepare for this exam. During my work as a teacher, I was fascinated by these students' distinct study methods and academic attitudes. For example, why are they so anxious about their scores in comparison to others? And why are they tirelessly striving for always higher and better scores? So with these questions in mind, I started my research. So my thesis shows an interesting circulation of Chinese-produced GRE test prep materials among Chinese students. Many of them resorted to this alternative test prep regime because they feel unable and unwilling to take advantage of the US mainstream academic resources. These savvy, ambitious students are ironically shot out of something as ordinary as GRE test prep. However, this Chinese special GRE test prep also at the same time helps these students. It helps them grasp content knowledge and prepares them for GRE level English reasoning and academic writing. Additionally, the experience of grinding for the standards test reduces the cultural shock and anxieties in studying in the suburban and rural US. Finally, these Chinese students are both extremely ambitious and anxious about their educational outcomes. Situated in an emerging neoliberal and competitive Chinese society, they are doing everything they can to secure their place in the future elite social economic strata. Simultaneously benefiting and suffering from their cutthroat elite education, these students reflect on their rigorous Chinese upbringing and elite status itself. So throughout the thesis, I have examined the tensions between these students' elite Chinese dispositions and equally privileged US education, and I ultimately show a new paradigm for transnational mobility. My research calls for the heterogeneity of the diaspora population in US education and turns our attention away from their trauma and achievement gaps. So instead of viewing them via a simplified dichotomy of success and failure, privileged and oppressed, I would like to use this research to highlight the complexities of their educational migration journey. Just like all children, these Chinese international students show their struggle and agency as diligent youth across two promising lands. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Emma, and I'm passionate about animal welfare. Accordingly, I have decided to collaborate with a nonprofit organization called the Stray Cat Relief Fund, or SCRF, for my engineering senior capstone project to build a shelter for stray and feral cats who live in Philadelphia. There are about 400,000 stray cats who live outdoors in the city, which is about one cat for every household. And even though cats are often able to find their own shelter, this may unfortunately lead them to areas that are dangerous for them or properties on which they are unwanted. Moreover, rehabilitation of the cats would be difficult because they are so numerous and they prefer to remain outdoors, which they consider to be their home. However, winters can get very cold and their fur coat only insulates them as long as they do not get wet. Therefore, they need warm and dry shelter to protect them and to prevent them from getting frostbite. For these reasons, the SCRF has established outdoor population-controlled fenced-in spaces, also known as cat colonies, which have become the home of 200 plus cats. And I help them build a shelter for the cats to live in to put in these colonies. The top goals for this design were for the structure to be safe, maintainable, and durable. After modeling the structure using a computer program, as you can see on the top left image, I conducted a structural analysis to ensure that it could safely withstand the weight of the snow on its roof, and I conducted a thermal analysis to ensure that it would be insulated enough to withstand below freezing temperatures. In building the shelter, I utilized materials that would be long-lasting and impervious to rain. As you can see here, starting from the ground up, the structure is raised off of the ground to prevent it from getting wet. There are 2 ramps for cats to easily climb up and down, 2 entries and exits, an alcove in the front where the cats can be fed, and a hinged roof for the caretakers to clean the space and to provide them access in case of an emergency. There is also a shelf inside, thus creating a second story and providing the cats with more space to sit, as you can see here on the bottom left cross-sectional view. Now that I've built the shelter, the next steps include transporting and installing it at the cat colony and monitoring it to see if the cats end up using it. In addition, I would like to update and improve the design to better meet the established goals. Ultimately, my hope is to be able to reiterate this process and to provide more cats with the shelter they need. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Twan. I use he, him pronouns, and today I'm going to be presenting to you on my honors biology thesis that I've been working on since I was a freshman. So to give you a little bit of background, all complex organisms start from just a single cell, but that single cell undergoes several rapid cell divisions, otherwise known as mitosis, to grow into an embryo that eventually becomes an adult. As we know, functional multicellular organisms not only have a large amount of cells, but those cells are of different cell types that serve different functions. In order to specify cells with different functions, cells undergo a process called asymmetric division, in which they divide and produce daughters that will go on to be two different cell types. This process occurs in a very organized and controlled fashion because when embryos develop, they eventually want to develop into organs or into adults in which different cell types are organized into functional units that we call organs. Throughout my career in the Swarthmore biology department, I've been really fascinated with how the process of asymmetric division works. More so, I've really wanted to understand what controls asymmetric division to drive it to occur in the same exact way in each embryo, each time. Since my freshman year, I've been doing research in heart development in C-squared embryos, which is something that I never really saw myself doing before coming to Swarthmore. In these embryos, they undergo critical cell division around the 6-hour mark after fertilization, in which a lineage of cells begin to divide asymmetrically, giving rise to one tail muscle cell and one heart cell. My research has shown that the biophysical process of ballooning and squeezing that occurs during the beginning of mitosis, called mitotic rounding, helps to control the way in which one particular protein, FGFR, is trafficked within the cell. FGFR becomes asymmetrically distributed into one of the daughter cells, and that daughter becomes the heart cell, whereas the other daughter, which has no FGFR in it, becomes the tail muscle progenitor. This process, called mitotic rounding, is a recent area of biology research that has been shown to be important not only in embryonic development, like I show in my research, but also in maintaining stem cells, and it's one of the cellular mechanisms that goes wrong when cancer becomes metastatic and spreads throughout the body. I'm really proud of my work because it's one of the few pieces of research that shows how mitotic rounding can influence the way in which a protein moves during mitosis and how that can influence asymmetric division and subsequent development of an embryo. It really adds to our knowledge of how mitotic rounding is really important in the body and is a really important process to think about when we talk about cell biology. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Parker Snipes. I'm an honors economics and computer science major, and today I'm really excited to share with you the research that I've been conducting over the past semester. In 2018, a devastating set of wildfires ripped through the state of California. Hundreds of lives were lost and thousands more lost their homes, their schools, and their livelihoods as once vibrant communities that had thrived in fire-stricken areas burnt to ashes. The impacts of the fire were severe and yet persisted for months as the skies stayed darkened with lingering smoke, forcing asthmatic and elderly residents to stay indoors even as rolling blackouts descended across the state. The effects of persistent air pollution, which have affected communities across the country for decades, can cause health defects or even death for infants and young children who grow up experiencing it. And the number of children needing treatment or hospitalization in the state during the period of the fires increased markedly. Although the factors underlying the wildfires were varied, one clear spark for many of the largest fires was severely under-maintained equipment by the state power company, PG&E. The company was forced to pay a multi-billion-dollar fine for its safety lapses, but many of the fire's worst effects, such as the lingering health effects from smoke exposure, did not factor into the court's decision. Although I'm not an environmental studies major and had never directly studied the effects of wildfires, I wanted to do what I could to shed light on the issue and give policymakers a clear, effective tool for estimating the extent of the damage caused by such negligence. To help estimate the effects of smoke on particulate matter on infant mortality, I gathered data from the state of California on wildfire locations and smoke levels, and national data to capture the number of infant deaths from respiratory causes in each county in the state. Using a technique known as differences in differences, I set out to precisely estimate the link between exposure and mortality. Effectively, this approach just means looking at each metropolitan area in the state and comparing the baseline levels of pollution with what they experienced in the wildfires and looking at their degree of exposure and how that affected mortality. So as we see in Los Angeles, which was one of the most affected counties in the state, baseline levels were increased roughly tenfold across the course of the wildfires, and mortality increased by roughly a factor of 3. 2003. This tracked broadly with what I observed across the state, which was that for fully affected counties, mortality roughly tripled as compared to those which experienced little to no wildfire-related disruption. So I think this is a really important result because it helps add to a key gap in holding companies accountable for the results of their actions and for the results of climate change that come from pollution. I think that this is a really important way for underserved communities to be able to get their just desserts in court and to be able to help hold powerful actors who don't take into account the effects that their actions have on vulnerable populations to account. I hope to be able to continue this research in the future and to be able to help solve tractable problems like it in the future. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you learned something from the presentation.
Hello, my name is Sophia Stills, and I'm going to be presenting my senior thesis research on the controversy surrounding the President's House in Philadelphia. The site itself is a modern rendering of George Washington's home from 1790 to 1800, while Philadelphia was the US capital. The monument explores events that took place during the early post-revolutionary era and details many of Washington's actions as president during that time. What caught my eye during my first visit, however, was not the history of Washington and his presidency, but the site's emphasis on the enslaved individuals Washington held while he lived there. I would soon learn that the inclusion and centrality of slavery at the President's House site was not a unanimous choice and actually erupted from an almost 10-year struggle between activists, park officials, historians, and local newspapers. The controversy began in 2002 when Philadelphia's Independence National Historic Park was planning to build a new Liberty Bell Pavilion, creating a new space to showcase the popular national symbol of American freedom. At the same time, historians discovered that the new pavilion was going to be built at the same geographic location where Washington's house once sat. They also realized that the slave quarters of Washington's home might still remain beneath the surface. This meant that a new shrine to American liberty would rest on the same ground where America's first president held slaves, keeping them in bondage through a legal loophole that dodged Pennsylvania's Gradual Abolition Act. When historians inquired as to how the Park Service would grapple with the inherent contradiction of slavery at the Liberty Bell, the Park Service claimed that the inclusion of slavery at the site would distract from the bell and confuse the public. In response, historians and local activists worked to publicize this paradox, arguing that the public deserved to know about this rich history and that it was both dishonest and ahistorical to efface the role of slavery at the heart of the nation's founding. Rather, they argued, exploring the paradoxical coexistence of bondage and democracy at the site would do justice to the complexities of the country's founding. Many proponents of the site argued that the inclusion of slavery was important, both in acknowledging the contributions of Black Americans to the nation's founding and also recognizing the ways racism persists today. In contrast, those who oppose slavery's inclusion argue that the site would embellish slavery's horrors and obscure the fact that America has, quote, changed for the better. Activists pushing for slavery's commemoration in Philadelphia during the President's House controversy argued that the recognition of slavery's centrality during the nation's founding is an important step in creating change today. Individuals who denied or downplayed the significance of slavery were implicitly enforcing boundaries over what it means to be an American and who gets to be included in those paradigms. The battle over the President's House is one example of many contemporary debates over the role of slavery in our national history and how to best remember it. Ultimately, the public decided that in order to fully understand America's founding, the history of slavery cannot be buried and cannot be erased. Thank you so much for your time.
Something like that wouldn't happen up here. That sentence is at the core of the myth that racism and racial violence are and historically have been foreign to a place like Duluth, Minnesota. In this far northern city in 1920, racial tensions were at a boiling point. In a scene repeated in towns and cities across the country, a white mob numbering up to 10,000 lynched 3 Black men, Elias Clayton, Elmer Jackson, and Isaac McGee, on the evening of June 15th. Immediately, white Duluthians went to work decontextualizing the lynchings, casting them as spectacular and anomalous, relying on and reaffirming the myth that something like that doesn't happen up here. This myth has been central to efforts to erase the history of racial violence in the city over the past 100 years. Confronting that myth has been central to remembering the lynchings as part of the longer history of racism in Duluth. Each time Duluthians remember or try to forget the lynchings, they do so within contemporary conversations about race and racism. My thesis seeks to situate the lynchings and the process of remembering and memorializing them within their local, regional, and national historical contexts. While Black Duluthians remembered and talked about the lynchings, textbooks, curricula, and histories written about the city omitted discussions of racial violence for decades. Over the past 30 years, a group of Duluthians have attempted to push back against those decades of silence, marking the gravesites of the three men in 1991, constructing this, the first large-scale memorial at the site of a lynching, in 2003, making a pilgrimage to the National Memorial for Peace and Justice down in Montgomery, Alabama in 2018, and erecting a spontaneous memorial to Breonna Taylor and George Floyd on top of the Duluth Lynching Memorial in 2020. They battled the persistent mythology that racism could not have roots so close to the Canadian border. When George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis just a few weeks before the 100th anniversary of the lynchings, it was clear that white Minnesotans had not dealt with their history of racial violence, nor its impact on the present. The myth that racial violence doesn't and didn't happen up north allows deeply rooted systems of oppression and centuries-old patterns of violence to be dismissed as individual instances, anomalies, unrelated to national or local issues of racism and racial violence. As a young Duluth activist told a group gathered at the Clayton Jackson McGee Memorial the day after Floyd's murder, "We're talking about it because we never fixed the problem." Thank you.
My name is Tiffany Wang, and I wrote an honors history thesis on memory and placemaking for third and fourth generation Peruvians of Chinese and Japanese descent. These are people who have at least one grandparent or great-grandparent who migrated from China or Japan in the late 19th or early 20th century, most likely as indentured laborers. These are also people who identify fully as Peruvian, seeing their Chinese or Japanese heritage as something that enhances both how they see themselves and more generally Peruvianness as a whole. While this may seem like an obscure and niche topic, Chinese and Japanese people have been migrating to Latin America since the mid-19th century. My mom was actually born in Brazil, something I myself thought was an anomaly. Thinking about my family's migration history and relationship to Brazil is what led me to this project. I wondered if this was happening elsewhere in South America, and if so, how did people of Asian descent understand their identity in the context of also being South American? I am immensely grateful to have connected with 7 third and fourth generation Peruvians of Chinese and Japanese descent and interviewed them about their experiences growing up in and their relationship to Peru, as well as their later experiences in the US and Asia. Many of my interviewees of Chinese descent identify as Tucson, an adaptation of a Cantonese word meaning someone born or raised here, here in this case being Peru. My interviewees of Japanese descent identify as Nikkei, a term used for people of the Japanese diaspora across the world, not just Peru. I emphasize the use of Peruvians of Chinese and Japanese descent rather than Chinese and Japanese Peruvians because Peruvianness is the central identity for most of these people, unlike in the US where, for example, I would never call myself an American of Chinese descent. The migration story from China or Japan often serves as a jumping off point of identity formation for my subjects. In this thesis, I think through how external events, such as riots resulting in the destruction of Chinese and Japanese businesses in the early 20th century, and the election of President Alberto Fujimori in 1990, and physical manifestations of Chinese and Japanese presence, such as the Lima Chinatown, push Peruvians of Chinese and Japanese descent to identify themselves. These events, organizations, and people have shaped Peruvian culture through things like schools started by the Chinese and Japanese, and chifas, Peruvian Chinese restaurants now seen as a staple of Peruvian cuisine. Using these historical and cultural touchpoints, we can see how being Peruvian is not a negation of their Chinese or Japanese heritage, and acknowledging and resonating with Tucson, Nikkei, Chinese, or Japanese heritage does not diminish, but rather enhances Peruvian identity. Some third and fourth generation Peruvians of Chinese and Japanese descent have traveled beyond Peru's borders, experiencing double migration, once again needing to renegotiate their identities in a new global context. However, just as their ancestors did when first arriving in Peru, Peruvians of Chinese and Japanese descent will continue to carve out their place in many geographical locations they inhabit and challenge stereotypical connections and conceptions of national identity. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Ariana Yett, and today I'll be sharing some of the work I did as part of my senior honors anthropology thesis titled From Plant to Product, the Circulation, Transformation, and Extraction of Kava, Piper Methysticum. What exactly is kava? Kava is a botanical that's been consumed by South Pacific islanders for thousands of years. I was first introduced to it when I was living in Fiji and was struck by the way Fijians took the root, mixed it with water to prepare a muddy brown beverage. For the last several centuries, Fijians and other Pacific islanders have been using kava to facilitate socialization, commune with ancestors, as well as for a host of other social and cultural reasons. Fast forward a couple of months, and I came across kava in a very different context. This time, as I was shopping in Whole Foods in Washington, D.C., I came across a bottle of kava extracts and pills. This immediately led to some confusion, as I struggled to reconcile the product I had come into contact with in Fiji with the bottle of pills that I then held in my hands. I began to wonder, what exactly was kava doing in the US? Who was consuming it, and for what reasons? This provided the kindling for a year-long research project where I sought to understand the different ways kava is transformed as it circulated out of the Pacific. To try to answer my research question, I spoke to a variety of kava consumers. In particular, I spoke to several Pacific kava consumers, American kava consumers, as well as kava companies, trying to understand the different meanings they see changing as kava circulated. My research findings revealed that as kava is removed from the Pacific, it's extracted along 3 different axes. Now, it's worth pointing out here that I'm using extraction slightly differently than the common sense definition. First, I argue that kava is extracted geographically. And by this I mean that as kava is removed from the Pacific, it's introduced to a whole host of new contexts. Second, I argue kava is extracted chemically. Kava consumers and company owners are using chemicals such as ethanol and acetone to distill kava down to its constituent properties, kavalactones. These kavalactones are then embedded with a wide variety of other ingredients to produce a whole slew of new products, such as kava tinctures and mints. Finally, I argue that kava is extracted conceptually. Kava consumers and vendors are taking this rich cultural and historical product and distilling it to substances that simply can be used for therapeutic value. Thus, this thesis project really helps me think about the different ways local products are transformed as they enter global markets. Yet, it's worth pointing out that kava isn't alone in this. Numerous other substances have all been dramatically transformed as they enter global economies. And if current trends continue, the Pacific could potentially lose out on any ability to benefit from global kava consumption. Thus, as kava becomes more globalized, we should be cautious about using it without understanding its origin and cultural context. Thank you very much.